There are some interesting topics.
It's so interesting. I'm an atheist myself. I'm more of a person who's close to science. Well, yes, not in science, but close to it.
Actually, sciences were created by believers. But there was a period at the beginning of the 19th century when science mostly moved away. That was the main idea. For example, the theory of evolution. What's the real kicker? That in the 21st century, it came back. So now science actually points in the opposite direction. And the two truly big things that we must consider are the scientific Big Bang theory and the complex structure of DNA. DNA, in fact, directly suggests that there is a creator God, or let's say a great programmer, because such complex informational molecules, the main thing isn't even the chemical elements themselves. Those are also very hard to obtain. Even now, they can't do it. They're struggling, they're very unstable. In the right quantities, there are tons of theories, but so far, no. They've been tinkering with this for over 100 years trying. The main thing is that these nucleotides, A, T, C, G, in English at least, are arranged in a specific order, and this order dictates the information. Just like in a program. If you start changing some parts inside the file, it will break. This means that everything is structured there. Everything is in its place. It's the same as looking at a book, for example, a volume of Dostoevsky. Everything is in a certain order. This is not a mess, some kind of letters, but information. So if we look at DNA, there is specific information there. That is specifically. Some people don't believe scientists, but if you believe scientists, there is a real movement going on within scientists right now. There are 1,500 professors there, including, by the way, even the deputy head of science at the biology department of the Russian SMU. I wrote the meaning as if saying that the theory of evolution works well for description. The adaptation of organisms to their environment, but it doesn't work at all for describing the development from simple to complex. In other words, roughly speaking, development doesn't work through the theory of evolution. That is, when we look at DNA, it's obvious. The idea of a great programmer comes back. That's what I call it. But actually, the scientist there calls it the agent with a capital A or the author. It doesn't really matter anyway. Objectively, looking at the sum of this information in DNA, it's easy to calculate now. You can estimate the number of organisms since the age of the Earth is known. The number of nucleotides, mutations passed from generation to generation, has already been studied. How many nucleotides have been studied? That's enough for a mathematical model. You plug it in and you get zero. So biologists, they're kind of romantics. They say maybe it happened this way, maybe that way. Mathematicians come in, do the calculations, and say, no, it's impossible. There's just not enough time.
Well, I still believe that people invented faith to make life easier. And as for the origin of life, I think that, after all, it's just the simplest case of a lucky coincidence. I believe in the theory that the first organic compounds appeared in the area of hydrothermal vents in the ocean. Those are very good conditions for the emergence of organic compounds. They simply combined and evolved over time. Then life appeared in water. Then it moved onto land, and so on.
Well, once again, two remarks. First of all, these organic compounds you're talking about are very unstable. They can barely be produced in laboratory conditions and only under complete sterility. So to say that somewhere out there in the ocean something like this happened is possible, of course, but it's a big stretch. And the second most important point, I'll say it again, you say it appeared. Even single-celled animals, living organisms, they are very complex. That is, for example, Darwin thought that the contents of this cell were kind of homogeneous, but there are so many complex technologies inside. If you ever take the time to look up an educational video about the motor protein kinesin, you will see it is responsible for transporting various organelles and essential cargo within the cell structure. It has addressing like on the internet, and the way it scales, its energy efficiency, it's also well thought out. I'll put it this way, humans haven't created anything like it yet. So to say that a tiny molecule is all great, that it somehow appeared and then there was this leap and suddenly fish appeared, I believe that even a worm couldn't just appear. I calculated the worm. What are the odds? The formation of worm DNA with 100 million nucleotides. That's 2 meters of written books. If we're talking about the banking system, the keys are considered unbreakable for the entire existence of the earth, and that's if there's only one page. In other words, they can't be replicated. But here we're talking about 2 meters. Who now has such a coherent theory? There isn't any at all. Some people just say, well, we'll think about it, and others honestly admit that if mutations aren't random, then that means there's an author. But by themselves, such, let's say, programs, molecular programs, cannot be created within the lifetime of the Earth or even the universe. How was it before? We were told that the Earth has always existed, that matter is eternal. So, somewhere, maybe on another planet, maybe it's not 14 billion years like the current age of our universe. You said that you're familiar with the topic. You can calculate it yourself. The number of nucleotides is 100 million. We need four letters. There is a minimum, well, about 100 million is the average range of the worm. Let's assume the minimal functional set found there, genes, including those once considered non-coding, though this classification is often questioned. But nevertheless, we're talking about the fact that there is still a minimum. Well, for the sake of argument, let us suppose it is not a full 100 million, but rather a smaller sum of 10 million. So take that 10 million and carefully calculate exactly what kind of probability is actually needed here for this molecule to assemble from these four letters. And now also keep in mind that we need living beings, not just particles. We need living organisms so that mutations appear during reproduction. That's the main driving force. A mutation appears if it's beneficial, it gets selected. Well, if it's useless, it gets lost and so on. But the point is, these are still random mutations. Yes, I'm saying that the theory of evolution doesn't work.
So how can it not work? If in the end we truly have such an extraordinary and vast diversity of all living things.
Well, once again, when we talk about diversity, that's exactly the theory of evolution. Again, we just need to clarify what the theory of evolution actually is. According to the latest data, the theory of evolution is the theory of organisms adapting to their environment. So, let's say a wolf appeared, was created. From it came the dog, from it the Arctic fox, the gray wolf, and so on. So all this is diversity. It arises as a result of adaptation. But from a frog, you can't get a wolf and you can't get one from a worm either. It won't work.
Do they need to evolve into them? Those who were supposed to have already done it.
No. Once again, or when you say the word evolve, I always hear that intuitively. And what you really mean by that is that they gradually develop over time.
Absolutely right.
That is true, but I firmly believe they adapt.
Well, adaptation is kind of its, well, evolution is a forced measure for adaptation.
No, that is not quite right. But to say that evolution is the primary fundamental driving force of development. Well, take a moment to look around at the world around you. Who is the true driving force of progress? The quiet conformists or the bold revolutionaries? Conformists. In adaptation, in the very idea of adaptation, there is no idea of development, it simply adapts. Most often, things are lost or simplified genetically. Naturally, there are also various types of insertions, but usually it is a successful case study. For example, there is such a remarkable level of resilience among the Pomor inhabitants in northern Russia who are resistant to AIDS, simply because they have lost a certain piece of a gene.
Yes, there are many such varieties.
Exactly. The gene became simpler, but it turned out to be successful and began to survive. So adaptation, yes. But when we talk, for example, about the appearance of wings in a beetle or say anything at all, for instance, even the simplest bacterium has what's called a flagellum, a bacterial flagellum. It involves, if I remember correctly, about 28 different proteins. Not just proteins in general, but types of proteins. Essentially, it's like a tiny electric rotor created at the molecular level, but for all of this to come together, all 28 have to appear at once. Well, roughly speaking, I don't remember the exact number right now, but all these proteins have to appear at the same time. If, for example, only two or three of them appeared, or the fourth one turned out to be irrelevant, that's it. Throw it all out and start over. In other words, it just doesn't work. By the way, this experiment is actually ongoing right now. The big evolutionary experiment. It's been going on for almost 30 years now, probably will be soon. Well, there's no talk of any new flagella or new proteins there. It's just that
Let's say just take a human being, for example. If you believe that humans really did evolve from apes, then humans have adapted to the life they live. Accordingly, we've built all our houses and all the technologies that are part of this adaptation to life as humans. And if we, well, thanks to this adaptation, we evolved, and as a result, we lost our tails. Now tendons are disappearing in newborns since they're no longer needed for climbing trees. We don't have tails anymore. Some people are even born without a coccyx because the coccyx is a vestigial structure.
there are two things I wanted to mention. This question about vestigial organs comes up often. So, humans have vestigial organs, or for example, some other animals have vestigial organs. But for me, since I work in IT and for a long time I did programming vestigial elements, well, I created programs and they had tons of vestigial code, tons of it. That doesn't mean at all that the code I created has no author. Usually you take a library, for example, a Java library. It has versions, of course, and they change as well. But when working with stacks or vectors, I don't reinvent the wheel. I just use it, and that's me with a very limited mind. Do you really think that the creator of human DNA is dumber than I am? Of course, he also reused things that, well, they work, let's say, especially when it comes to how cells function. Why rewrite them? They're stable, they work, development moves forward, and so on. So rudiments are